September 15, 1944. And Gunnery Sergeant Lewis Bausell, 31 years old, from Cumberland, Maryland, demolition specialist with 1st Marine Division preparing to assault Peleliu Island in the Palau chain, stood on landing craft approaching white coral beaches reviewing equipment manifest that contradicted standard Marine Corps assault doctrine. His squad carried 16 portable flamethrowers, 40 satchel charges containing 8 pounds composition C2 explosive each, and 32 thermite grenades. Designed for attacking fortified positions, all non-standard equipment that regimental commanders had initially refused to authorize because Marine assault doctrine emphasized rapid beach seizure through infantry maneuvers supported by naval gunfire, not slow methodical reduction of fortified positions using specialized demolition equipment. Division intelligence officer had briefed that Peleliu garrison numbered approximately 11,000 Japanese defenders under Colonel Kunio Nakagawa, who'd spent 8 months fortifying island's central ridge system with 500 interconnected caves and bunkers carved into coral limestone, creating fortress that aerial reconnaissance suggested was most heavily fortified target Marines had encountered in Pacific campaign. But Division Commander Major General William Rupertus had publicly predicted that Peleliu would be secured in 3 to 4 days using standard amphibious assault tactics that had succeeded at previous island operations, and Rupertus had dismissed staff officers' concerns that cave fortifications required specialized equipment and tactics, arguing that aggressive infantry assault supported by tanks and artillery would overwhelm Japanese defenders regardless of fortification strength. Bausell, who'd fought at Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester where Japanese fortifications had produced unexpectedly high Marine casualties, had privately disagreed with Rupertus' optimistic timeline and had petitioned his battalion commander to authorize additional demolition equipment based on intelligence showing extensive cave systems, and Battalion Commander Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Walt had agreed, providing Bausell's platoon with specialized equipment against regimental objections, and this decision to prioritize demolitions over speed would prove critical because what everyone, including most senior Marine commanders, failed to understand was that Peleliu's cave fortifications represented fundamental shift in Japanese defensive tactics away from suicidal beach defense charges toward defense in depth from fortified positions that naval gunfire couldn't destroy and infantry assault couldn't overrun, requiring methodical demolition tactics that contradicted Marine Corps doctrine. Emphasizing aggressive maneuver. The strategic context that made Bausell question whether battle was necessary centered on Admiral William Halsey's recommendation 3 weeks earlier that Peleliu invasion be cancelled because MacArthur's Philippines campaign was proceeding ahead of schedule, making Peleliu's airfield unnecessary for supporting operations, and Halsey, who commanded 3rd Fleet, had argued directly to Admiral Nimitz that Peleliu operation should be scrubbed because strategic rationale, securing airfield to support Philippines invasion, had been overtaken by events since Philippines operation was being advanced, eliminating need for intermediate airbase. But Nimitz had declined to cancel operation because invasion forces were already embarked and because Joint Chiefs had approved operation, making cancellation politically complicated despite military logic favoring Halsey's position. So 30,000 Marines and soldiers were committed to assault that senior fleet commander considered strategically unnecessary for objective whose value was debatable even before operation began. What happened over next 73 days would validate both Bausell's tactical concerns about cave fortifications requiring specialized demolition equipment and Halsey's strategic concerns about operation being unnecessary waste of lives for island whose capture contributed minimal value to Pacific campaign, producing approximately 10,000 American casualties including 2,000 dead for island that MacArthur's forces bypassed anyway when advancing on Philippines, making Peleliu perhaps most strategically questionable American operation in Pacific theater where battle was fought competently at tactical level, but shouldn't have been fought at all at strategic level, demonstrating that tactical proficiency cannot compensate for strategic error and that soldiers' courage cannot redeem operational decisions that fail to serve broader campaign objectives. According to 1st Marine Division operation orders issued August 1944. Bausell obtained his platoon's specialized demolition equipment through unofficial channels that circumvented standard requisition procedures. Lieutenant Colonel Walt, who commanded 2nd Battalion 5th Marines, had observed Japanese cave defense tactics at Cape Gloucester in December 1943. Where interconnected bunker systems had produced Marine casualties that exceeded pre-operation estimates, and Walt had concluded that reducing fortified positions required specialized equipment and tactics beyond standard infantry weapons, so he'd authorized Bausell to requisition additional flamethrowers and demolition charges from division supply, bypassing regimental headquarters that was restricting demolition equipment allocation because Division Commander Rupertus believed excessive demolition equipment would slow assault tempo that doctrine specified should achieve rapid penetration into enemy rear areas. Division Operations Officer Colonel John Selden had specifically quoted during planning conference August 20 that Peleliu will be a short operation, 3 days maximum before organized resistance ends, so we need to prioritize speed over specialized equipment that slows maneuver. And this assessment was based on previous operations including Tarawa, where despite heavy fortifications Marines had secured island in 76 hours. But Selden's analysis failed to account for two critical differences between Tarawa and Peleliu. Tarawa's fortifications were primarily concrete bunkers vulnerable to naval gunfire and tank guns, while Peleliu's caves carved into solid coral were essentially immune to indirect fire. And Tarawa's defenders had executed suicidal banzai charges, depleting their force quickly, while intelligence indicated Peleliu's garrison was trained in defense in-depth tactics that would preserve force through extended engagement. Previous American failures with numbers at similar fortified positions provided warning that division planning ignored. Saipan, June-July 1944. Had cost 3,000 American dead and 10,000 wounded over 25 days despite pre-invasion estimates of 2 weeks maximum, and Guam, July-August 1944. Had produced 1,800 American dead and 7,000 wounded over 21 days against garrison that was smaller than Peleliu's, and both operations had required extensive demolition operations to reduce cave and bunker systems that naval bombardment couldn't destroy. Yet Peleliu planning allocated minimal demolition resources, reflecting persistent optimism that aggressive infantry assault could overcome fortifications through speed and violence of action. Enemy advantage that intelligence had identified. But planning had underestimated was Colonel Nakagawa's defensive system that integrated natural terrain with engineered fortifications. Peleliu's central Umurbrigol ridges rose 200 feet above surrounding terrain, creating observation positions from which Japanese artillery could target entire island, and Nakagawa's engineers had spent 8 months drilling 500 caves into coral limestone, creating positions that housed command posts, hospitals, supply dumps, barracks, and firing positions connected by tunnels, allowing defenders to move between positions without surface exposure, and cave entrances were positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire, meaning Marines approaching one cave would be targeted from multiple adjacent caves, creating killing zones that couldn't be suppressed by conventional fire support. The technical challenge that standard Marine infantry tactics couldn't solve was that caves were immune to weapons that had been effective against surface fortifications. Naval gunfire and aerial bombs couldn't penetrate more than surface layer of coral, meaning cave interiors remained undamaged. Flamethrower infantry portable units had insufficient range to project flame deep into cave systems, and grenades and small arms fire were ineffective against defenders positioned deep in caves beyond direct line of sight, so reducing each cave required approaches that doctrinal training hadn't prepared Marines for, including coordinated demolition assaults using satchel charges to collapse cave entrances and flamethrowers to burn out defenders who retreated deeper into systems. Bausell's background in demolitions came from pre-war civilian experience as construction worker in Cumberland, where he'd learned explosive handling for quarry operations, and when he'd enlisted. 1942. He'd been assigned to demolition specialty where his civilian experience with blasting rock translated directly to military demolitions, and at Guadalcanal and Cape Gloucester he'd developed techniques for attacking bunkers using timed satchel charges that he'd carry to fortification entrance then throw inside before withdrawing to detonation distance, and these techniques had proven effective against wooden and concrete bunkers, but hadn't been tested against cave systems where defenders could retreat beyond explosive effective radius then reoccupy positions after detonation, so Peleliu would require developing entirely new demolition procedures that combined explosives with flamethrowers to ensure caves were permanently neutralized rather than temporarily suppressed. According to post-battle intelligence assessment compiled from captured Japanese documents, enemy tactical advantage centered on Colonel Nakagawa's defensive concept that reversed traditional Japanese doctrine. Instead of defending at beach and conducting counterattacks to drive invaders into sea tactics that had failed at Tarawa and Saipan, Nakagawa withdrew his forces from beaches allowing Marines to land unopposed then engaged them from fortified positions on ridges where Marines would be exposed to carefully registered artillery and mortar fire while attacking uphill against positions that couldn't be suppressed by American fire support. American casualties suffered during first 2 days validated intelligence warnings that operation would be costly. 1st Marines Regiment that landed on left flank lost approximately 1,000 casualties, 17% of regimental strength, in first 48 hours fighting to advance just 1,000 yards inland against resistance that intelligence correctly predicted would be formidable. And 5th Marines and Center lost 600 casualties achieving similar minimal gains, producing combined casualty rate of approximately 1,500 in 2 days that exceeded Tarawa's first-day casualties despite Tarawa being considered exceptionally bloody operation. Why standard tactics failed became apparent during first engagements when Marines attempted to assault ridge positions using fire and maneuver techniques that had succeeded in previous operations. Squads advancing toward cave positions while supporting units provided suppressive fire discovered that suppressive fire was ineffective because Japanese defenders simply withdrew into cave depths beyond weapon range then emerged after Marines ceased firing to resume defending positions, and when Marines attempted to assault cave entrances they were engaged by positions on adjacent ridges creating crossfire that produced casualties without achieving objective because even when Marines reached cave entrance they couldn't project fire deep enough into cave to neutralize defenders positioned in rear chambers. The technical challenge that made cave reduction so difficult was combination of terrain and construction. Coral limestone was harder than concrete meaning that explosives produced less fragmentation than similar charges against concrete bunkers. Cave systems had multiple chambers connected by tunnels allowing defenders to retreat from threatened entrances then counterattack through alternate entrances once American assault force withdrew, and cave entrances were deliberately small, typically 2 to 3 feet in diameter, preventing vehicles or heavy weapons from directly engaging interior while providing defenders with easily defended choke points where single machine gun could stop entire squads' advance. Specific tactical problems that Marines encountered included limited visibility inside caves where darkness prevented target identification beyond 20 feet making aimed fire impossible, ventilation issues where cave systems created natural air circulation that dispersed smoke grenades and made gas weapons ineffective, and psychological factors where Marines who entered caves faced close-quarters combat in confined spaces against defenders who knew terrain and who could attack from unexpected directions through connecting tunnels. Japanese artillery advantage derived from pre-registered firing data. Nakagawa's gunners had spent months calculating precise coordinates for every approach route, beach area, and likely assembly area on island meaning that Japanese artillery could deliver accurate fire without adjustment period that normally required multiple ranging shots, and Marines discovered that whenever they assembled in preparation for assault Japanese artillery would impact within seconds indicating forward observers had immediate communication with gun positions and that defensive fire plans were thoroughly prepared. Marine casualties from artillery during Peleliu's first week exceeded casualties from small arms demonstrating that indirect fire posed greater threat than direct engagement. with battalion records showing approximately 40% of casualties resulted from artillery and mortar fire compared to 30% from rifles and machine guns, reversing typical Pacific Island pattern where direct fire produced majority of casualties. Naval gunfire support limitations that planning had underestimated became critical factor limiting Marine offensive capability. Pre-invasion bombardment September 12 to 14 had expended approximately 2,000 tons of ordnance against island fortifications, producing minimal actual damage to cave systems because shells either detonated on surface creating craters without penetrating into caves or penetrated surface layer, but lacked sufficient mass to collapse cave structures, and post-invasion fire support was similarly ineffective because forward observers couldn't accurately identify cave positions from observation posts that were themselves under Japanese observation and fire, so Marines requesting fire support often couldn't provide precise coordinates necessary for effective engagement. The cumulative effect of these tactical disadvantages was that Marines were fighting uphill against fortified positions that couldn't be destroyed by supporting weapons, taking casualties from positions that couldn't be identified or suppressed, and achieving advances measured in yards per day rather than typical island operation pace of miles per day, producing casualty rates that by September 20, 5 days into operation, had reached 3,000 total casualties, representing 10% of landing force strength, with no indication that Japanese defensive capability was degrading. According to 2nd Battalion 5th Marines Action Report, Bausell's first successful cave reduction using specialized tactics occurred September 18 on ridge position designated Hill 100, where Japanese defenders had established position in cave system with 3 visible entrances spaced approximately 50 feet apart, connected by interior tunnels, allowing defenders to shift between positions depending on direction of Marine assault, and previous attempts by rifle companies to assault position using standard infantry tactics had failed, with 16 Marines wounded, including 1 platoon commander, when Japanese defenders engaged assault force from multiple positions simultaneously. Step-by-step demolition procedure that Bausell developed involved coordination between 4-man teams, each with specific function. First team approached cave entrance under covering fire from rifle squad positioned approximately 100 yards distant. Scout carried detector rod, essentially a long pole, to probe ground ahead, checking for mines that Japanese defenders frequently placed on approach routes, and once team reached position approximately 30 feet from cave entrance, Scout would mark safe approach route with white tape for follow-on elements. Second team consisted of flamethrower operator and assistant who carried fuel cylinders and provided security, and flamethrower operator would position himself at edge of effective range, approximately 40 feet from entrance, and would project sustained flame burst lasting 5 to 8 seconds into cave entrance, burning oxygen from forward chambers and forcing defenders to retreat deeper into system away from entrance. Third team was demolitions, consisting of Bausell carrying 2 satchel charges each containing 8 pounds composition C2 explosive with 30-second time fuses, and 1 assistant carrying additional charges and providing covering fire, and Bausell would wait until flamethrower burst ended, then would rush forward to cave entrance using white tape route that Scout had marked, would light both satchel charge fuses using cigarette lighter, producing distinctive smoke and sparking that triggered withdrawal signal, would throw charges as deep into cave entrance as possible, attempting to get them past first chamber into interior spaces where defenders had retreated from flamethrower, then would run back along tape route to detonation distance of approximately 100 feet, covering distance in approximately 15 seconds before 30-second fuses detonated. Technical process required precise timing. If demolitions team advanced before flamethrower burst ended, they would be exposed to defensive fire from cave occupants. If they delayed too long after flamethrower ended, defenders might reposition to engage them, and if satchel charges weren't thrown deep enough into cave, defenders could either throw them back out before detonation or could retreat beyond effective blast radius, rendering charge ineffective. First result at Hill 100 cave demonstrated procedure's effectiveness. Flamethrower burst projected approximately 50 feet of flame into cave entrance, producing thick black smoke indicating that petroleum-based fuel was burning cave interior contents. Bausell advanced and threw both satchel charges, successfully placing them approximately 20 feet inside entrance beyond first chamber. Detonation collapsed cave entrance and produced secondary explosion inside cave, indicating that charges had destroyed ammunition or equipment stored in interior, and follow-on rifle squad entering cave after 30-minute ventilation period found 4 Japanese defenders dead from blast effects and no evidence of surviving defenders using connecting tunnels to escape or reposition. Enemy recognition that Marines were using different tactics came during second cave assault same day when Japanese defenders attempted to counter demolition technique by firing at flamethrower operator during approach, forcing him to take cover short of effective range. But Bausell adapted by having rifle squad provide enhanced suppressive fire using 3 Browning automatic rifles instead of normal 1 per squad, concentrating fire on cave entrance to prevent defenders from exposing themselves to return fire, and this increased suppression allowed flamethrower operator to reach effective position and complete procedure. Exact distances that proved critical for procedure included rifle squad covering positions at 100 yards providing observation and suppression fire, flamethrower effective range of 40 feet where flame could project into cave entrance with sufficient intensity to force defender withdrawal, satchel charge throw distance of approximately 30 feet required to place charges beyond first chamber, and safe detonation distance of 100 feet where demolition team could take cover. Behind terrain features before 8-pound charges detonated, producing blast that would kill exposed personnel within 50-foot radius. Numbers from Hill 100 operations September 18 showed efficiency compared to previous attempts. Bausell's platoon reduced 4 cave positions in 6 hours using procedures described, producing estimated 16 Japanese casualties while suffering 3 Marine wounded, none fatal, compared to previous 3 days when rifle companies had attempted reducing same positions using standard tactics, producing 16 Marine casualties including 4 dead without successfully neutralizing any caves. Battalion Commander Walt, who observed operations, reported to regiment that specialized demolition tactics were significantly more effective than infantry assault and recommended that similar procedures be adopted across division. But regiment was initially reluctant to modify tactics because doctrine emphasized speed and aggressive maneuver rather than methodical position reduction that Walt was advocating, though casualty rates eventually forced regimental reconsideration as it became clear that standard tactics couldn't achieve objectives without unacceptable losses. According to Japanese documents captured after Peleliu's conclusion, Colonel Nakagawa recognized Marines' specialized demolition tactics by September 20, 5 days into battle, and issued tactical guidance to subordinate commanders describing American procedures and recommending countermeasures. Defenders should maintain observation on cave entrances during any lull in fighting to detect American flamethrower teams approaching, should engage flamethrower operators at maximum range because flamethrowers were vulnerable to small arms fire that could puncture fuel tanks, creating catastrophic failures, and should prepare secondary firing positions inside caves beyond reach of American explosives where defenders could survive demolition attempts, then reoccupy forward positions after American teams withdrew. Specific countermeasures that Japanese defenders implemented included repositioning machine guns to cover approaches from flanking positions rather than from cave entrance, directly making suppressive fire less effective because Marines couldn't identify firing position to direct counterfire, placing snipers in elevated positions overlooking demolition approach routes where they could target individual team members, particularly flamethrower operators whose equipment made them easily identifiable, and installing wooden doors at cave entrances that could be closed after initial flamethrower burst, preventing satchel charges from being thrown deep into cave interior. Near-death moment that demonstrated Japanese adaptation occurred September 23 when Bausell's team assaulted cave position on ridge designated Hill 140 using standard procedures, but encountered modified defensive tactics. As flamethrower operator advanced to 40-foot range, Japanese sniper positioned approximately 200 yards distant on adjacent ridge fired single shot, striking flamethrower fuel tank, puncturing compressed air cylinder that pressurized fuel delivery system, resulting in catastrophic equipment failure where fuel ignited on flamethrower operator's back, producing flames that engulfed operator within seconds, and operator Private First Class James McQueen, age 20, from Philadelphia, dropped equipment and rolled on ground attempting to extinguish flames while assistant tried to remove burning tank harness, and despite efforts McQueen suffered third-degree burns over 60% of body surface, requiring immediate evacuation and eventual death from complications 3 weeks later at field hospital, making him casualty of Japanese counter-tactics that specifically targeted demolitions equipment vulnerability. Factual circumstances of McQueen's injury illustrated risk that demolitions teams accepted. Flamethrowers carried 4 gallons napalm-thickened fuel under nitrogen pressure of 300 pounds per square inch, and pressurized fuel igniting on operator produced temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit that standard protective equipment couldn't resist. So any penetration of fuel tank while operator was carrying equipment was likely fatal or severely injuring, yet demolitions work required operators to expose themselves at relatively close range to enemy positions, accepting this risk because cave reduction couldn't be accomplished from standoff distances. Bausell's counter to Japanese counter-tactics involved multiple adaptations. First, flamethrower teams would approach from different angles each engagement, preventing Japanese defenders from pre-positioning to target predictable approach routes. Second, Marine snipers were assigned to provide counter-sniper fire against positions that might target demolitions teams, requiring coordination between demolitions platoon and battalion scout sniper section. And third, satchel charges were modified to include thermite grenades taped to explosive charges so that even if charges couldn't be thrown deep into caves, thermite would generate sufficient heat to destroy wooden doors or barriers that Japanese installed to protect interior positions. Technical modifications to equipment based on combat experience included wrapping flamethrower fuel tanks with sandbag fragments, providing minimal ballistic protection against rifle rounds though not against direct machine gun fire, positioning assistant flamethrower operator with fire extinguisher so catastrophic failures could be addressed immediately rather than allowing uncontrolled burning, and training all demolitions personnel in immediate action drills for equipment failures, including dropping compromised equipment and withdrawing to safe distance rather than attempting to salvage burning or damaged gear that could detonate explosives team members were carrying. Additional Japanese defensive adaptation included using smoke generators inside caves to obscure interior and prevent Marines from observing whether initial demolition attempts had been successful, requiring multiple follow-on assaults against same position because reconnaissance couldn't determine if defenders remained capable of resistance, and positioning defenders in mutually supporting cave systems where neutralizing one cave still left Marines exposed to fire from adjacent positions, requiring simultaneous assaults on multiple caves that exceeded available demolitions resources. Combat engagement September 25 illustrated tactical evolution where both sides had adapted procedures. Bausell's reinforced platoon, now numbering 32 Marines including additional flamethrower teams and sniper support, assaulted cluster of 5 interconnected caves on ridgeline, using coordinated approach where 3 positions were engaged simultaneously, preventing defenders from concentrating fire on single team. An assault achieved destruction of all 5 positions within 4 hours, with casualties limited to 2 Marines wounded, neither fatally, demonstrating that adapted tactics partially mitigated Japanese countermeasures though risk remained substantial and procedure still required Marines to expose themselves at close range to accomplish objective. According to battalion records covering period September 26 through October 15, Bausell's procedures were refined through 23 separate cave reduction operations that progressively improved efficiency and reduced Marine casualties. Average time required to neutralize single cave position decreased from initial 6 hours at Hill 100 to approximately 90 minutes by mid-October as teams became more proficient. Marine casualties per cave reduced from initial average of 2 wounded per position to approximately 0.3 casualties. per position by operations end, and success rate, defined as permanent neutralization requiring no follow-on assaults, increased from 60% initially to 95% after procedures were standardized and disseminated across division. Multiple engagements demonstrated that tactical advantage was shifting toward Marines as specialized tactics overcame Japanese fortification advantages. Cave positions that would have required multiple rifle companies and produced dozens of casualties using standard infantry assault could be neutralized by four-man demolition team with rifle squad support in under 2 hours with minimal casualties. And cumulative effect was that rate of advance into Umerbra Ridge complex accelerated from initial 50 yards per day to approximately 200 yards per day as demolition techniques became standard practice across engaged battalions. Technical improvements included development of shaped charges, satchel charges with directional focusing to concentrate blast effects toward cave interior rather than dispersing omnidirectionally, that increased effective penetration depth, allowing smaller charges to achieve results previously requiring larger loads. An introduction of smoke grenades coordinated with flamethrower employment were white phosphorus grenades thrown into cave entrance immediately before flamethrower burst would generate obscuring smoke, preventing defenders from accurately returning fire during demolition team approach. Numbers accumulating across battalion operations showed significant results. Bausell's platoon between September 18 and October 15 reduced 68 cave positions using specialized procedures compared to rest of battalion, which reduced 42 positions using standard tactics, and casualty comparison showed Bausell's platoon suffered 16 wounded and 1 killed, reducing their 68 caves. 0.25 casualties per cave, while standard tactics produced 73 casualties including 18 killed across 42 caves. 1.7 casualties per cave, demonstrating that specialized demolitions reduced Marine casualties by approximately 85% per objective neutralized. Coordination improvements included establishing standard radio procedures where demolitions teams called for supporting fires using concise terminology that forward observers understood, developing hand signals allowing silent communication between team members during final approach when radio communications would alert defenders to imminent assault, and creating quick reaction force concept where reserve squad would position within 200 yards of active demolition site ready to provide reinforcement if team encountered unexpected resistance or if wounded required immediate extraction under fire. If you're finding this account of how tactical innovation reduced casualties in unnecessarily costly operation valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe to understand how individual initiative at small unit level mitigated strategic errors that higher command committed when authorizing operations that shouldn't have been conducted. Equipment standardization across division occurred after Regimental Commander Colonel Harold Harris observed Bausell's operations October 1 and directed that demolitions procedures be adopted as standard practice, with division issuing tactical bulletin October 5 titled Cave Warfare Techniques that described procedures Bausell had developed and required all battalions to train demolitions teams using specified tactics, and division supply increased allocation of flamethrowers from 16 per regiment to 32 and increased satchel charge allocation from 40 per battalion to 80, recognizing that cave reduction required specialized equipment in quantities exceeding doctrinal allowances. Training program established by Division October 7 brought demolition specialists from engaged battalions to rear area where they conducted 2-day courses instructing replacements and personnel from units rotating into line on cave assault procedures, and approximately 400 Marines received this training during October before operation concluded, disseminating tactics that had been developed through combat experience across entire division, ensuring that knowledge wasn't lost when casualties occurred among experienced practitioners. Marine Corps institutional response was mixed. Division operations officer acknowledged that specialized tactics were necessary for Peleliu's unique terrain, but resisted incorporating procedures into official doctrine, arguing that most Pacific islands didn't have comparable cave systems, making Peleliu an anomaly. though veterans of Iwo Jima campaign February-March 1945 would later note that caves on Iwo's Mount Suribachi required identical tactics to Peleliu's Umerbrigol ridges, suggesting that division's experience was more broadly applicable than initial resistance suggested. Quantitative results by mid-October showed that tactical innovation had made strategically questionable operation tactically manageable. Daily casualty rates had declined from peak of 200 per day during first week to approximately 30 per day by mid-October despite continued combat intensity, and rate of cave neutralizations had increased from 5 per day to 20 per day, allowing progressive reduction of Japanese defensive positions, though ultimate value of achieving these tactical successes on island that strategic planning should have bypassed remained questionable. According to 2nd Battalion 5th Marines casualty records, equipment failure crisis occurred October 12 when sustained operations depleted division's flamethrower fuel supplies faster than logistics system could replenish them. Division ordnance officer reported that napalm-thickened fuel stocks were exhausted and resupply from rear area depots wouldn't arrive for approximately 72 hours, and this supply shortage occurred precisely when 5th Marines was conducting major assault against Ridge Complex designated Five Sisters, where intelligence estimated approximately 300 Japanese defenders occupied 20 interconnected cave positions requiring intensive demolitions operations that depended on flamethrower support. Overwhelming enemy response during this supply crisis demonstrated that Japanese defenders recognized when Marines lacked usual demolitions capability. October 13, Japanese forces conducted coordinated counterattack from cave positions that Marines hadn't yet reduced, advancing approximately 200 yards down ridgeline, penetrating Marine positions and overrunning forward aid station, where they killed 4 wounded Marines and 2 corpsmen before being driven back by reserve companies, and this counterattack was atypical of Japanese defensive tactics that normally emphasized static defense from fortified positions rather than maneuver operations, suggesting that defenders had detected weakness in Marine assault capability when flamethrower operations ceased. Critical decision under pressure confronted Battalion Commander Walt, who had to choose between continuing assault against Five Sisters using only satchel charges and small arms, accepting higher casualties inevitable without flamethrower support, or suspending operations until resupply arrived, forfeiting tactical momentum and allowing Japanese defenders additional time to prepare defenses. Division Commander Rupertus, who was under pressure from Corps Commander to complete operations, had ordered continued offensive operations regardless of supply shortfalls. But Walt assessed that attacking fortified positions without flamethrowers would produce casualties exceeding acceptable limits, particularly given that operation's strategic value was questionable since Peleliu's airfield original invasion objective was already operational and supporting missions, making reduction of remaining ridge positions militarily unnecessary beyond psychological commitment to completing mission that had been started. Close call occurred October 14 when Walt authorized limited assault against single cave position using only demolitions without flamethrower support to test feasibility. Bausell led 6-man team approaching cave designated position 37 using smoke grenades for concealment instead of flamethrower suppression. But as team reached 30 feet from entrance, Japanese defenders emerged firing machine gun at point-blank range, killing 1 Marine instantly and wounding 3 others, including Bausell, who received bullet wound through left shoulder that fractured clavicle, and surviving team members withdrew under covering fire from support squad carrying wounded and dead, while Japanese defenders reoccupied cave, demonstrating that without flamethrower capability demolition assaults faced drastically increased risk with reduced success probability. Specific details of Bausell's wound illustrated immediate consequences of equipment shortage. Japanese 7.7 mm machine gun round entered through anterior left shoulder approximately 2 inches below clavicle midpoint, fragmented on striking bone creating 4 separate wound channels, exited through posterior shoulder leaving approximately 3-inch diameter exit wound, and produced immediate loss of left arm function from brachial plexus nerve damage that medical officer at aid station initially Assessed as potentially permanent though eventual surgical intervention restored partial function, and Bausell required immediate evacuation to hospital ship for surgery, preventing him from participating in operations final 2 weeks, though his demolitions procedures continued to be employed by trained replacements who'd learned techniques through division training program. Battalion medical officer reported that casualty rates during October 13th to 15th period, when flamethrower fuel was unavailable, increased to levels comparable to operations first week, with 43 casualties in 3 days, including 11 killed, compared to typical recent rate of approximately 10 casualties daily with 1 to 2 killed, quantitatively demonstrating that specialized equipment wasn't merely helpful improvement, but was essential enabler that reduced casualties by approximately 75% when available. Division response to supply crisis involved emergency requisition, flying flamethrower fuel directly from Guadalcanal depot using transport aircraft rather than waiting for scheduled resupply convoy, and division ordnance officer personally flew to Guadalcanal October 14, returning with sufficient fuel to resume operations October 16. But 3-day suspension had cost approximately 100 casualties and had allowed Japanese defenders to reinforce positions that would require additional week to reduce. Strategic irony that Marines fighting crisis recognized was that highest intensity combat operations were occurring 7 weeks into operation that division commander had predicted would last 4 days, and that sustained casualties for objective whose strategic value had been questioned before operation began produced resentment among veterans who understood that Peleliu represented military and political commitment rather than operational necessity, with Battalion War Diary entry October 15. Noting personnel morale affected by recognition that operation continues beyond reasonable military purpose and that casualties are being taken to achieve objective of unclear value, though this critical assessment was edited from official records before submission to higher headquarters because questioning operational necessity was considered defeatist regardless of observations' accuracy. According to 1st Marine Division Final Action Report dated December 1944, Peleliu operation concluded November 27 after 73 days of sustained combat, and final outcome quantified both tactical success of specialized demolitions and strategic questionability of entire operation. Division demolitions teams using procedures that Bausell pioneered had reduced approximately 500 Japanese cave and bunker positions in Umurbragal Ridge complex, neutralizing defensive system that pre-invasion intelligence correctly assessed as most formidable fortification Americans had encountered in Pacific. But total cost of achieving this tactical success was 1,794 Americans killed and 8,010 wounded. Total 9,804 casualties, representing 33% of landing force strength for island whose strategic value Admiral Halsey had questioned before invasion began and whose capture contributed minimal benefit to Philippines campaign that MacArthur's forces conducted successfully without requiring Peleliu's airfield for support. Total numbers regarding specialized demolitions quantified their effectiveness. Demolitions teams trained in cave assault procedures reduced caves at average rate of 0.25 Marine casualties per position neutralized, while units using standard infantry tactics suffered average 1.7 casualties per position, and extrapolating across 500 positions suggests that universal adoption of specialized tactics from operations beginning rather than mid-operation might have reduced total casualties by approximately 40%, approximately 4,000 casualties, though this calculation assumes tactical factors remained constant, which actual combat variability doesn't guarantee. But statistical analysis suggests specialized procedures saved approximately 2,000 casualties compared to projections based on initial tactical approach. Rounds fired during specialized demolitions operations included approximately 8,000 flamethrower bursts expending approximately 32,000 gallons napalm-thickened fuel, 9,000 satchel charges totaling 72,000 pounds composition C2 explosive, and 15,000 thermite grenades, and these specialized munitions expenditures exceeded any previous Marine Division operation, demonstrating that cave warfare consumed resources at rates that standard ammunition allocations didn't accommodate, requiring continuous emergency resupply throughout operation. Targets eliminated using demolitions procedures included cave positions housing command posts where Japanese officers directed defensive operations, ammunition storage caves that when destroyed produced secondary explosions indicating successful demolition, hospital caves where wounded Japanese soldiers received treatment, and where demolitions raised ethical questions that Marines addressed by offering surrender before assault. Those surrender offers were typically refused, requiring demolition. Despite humanitarian concerns, and artillery positions in caves where Japanese guns could fire then withdraw into protected positions, preventing American counter-battery fire from neutralizing them, requiring close assault to achieve destruction. Accuracy metrics comparing specialized demolitions to standard tactics showed dramatic effectiveness difference. Caves assaulted using flamethrower satchel charge procedures required average 1.2 assaults to achieve permanent neutralization, meaning most caves were successfully destroyed on first attempt, while approximately 20% required follow-on operations, while caves assaulted using standard infantry tactics required average 3.8 assaults because defenders could retreat during suppressive fire, then reoccupy after American forces withdrew, and this efficiency difference meant that specialized tactics achieved results in 1/3 the time with 1/4 the casualties of conventional approaches. Comparison to standard approach that division initially employed showed that tactical innovation developed mid-operation had measurably improved outcomes. First 2 weeks September 15th to 30th, when standard tactics predominated, produced 4,836 casualties, approximately 345 per day, while final 4 weeks October 16th to November 15th, after specialized tactics were universally adopted, produced 2,100 casualties, approximately 75 per day, representing 78% reduction in daily casualty rate, though this comparison is complicated by factors including reduced Japanese defensive capability as their forces were progressively destroyed and reduced operational tempo as division rested depleted units. But tactical reports attribute majority of casualty reduction to improved assault procedures rather than enemy degradation. Immediate tactical result was complete neutralization of Japanese defensive capability, with approximately 10,700 Japanese defenders killed during operation and only 200 captured, 98% fatality rate that was typical of Pacific Island operations where Japanese defenders fought to death rather than surrender, and complete American control of island including airfield that began supporting operations, though at scale smaller than pre-invasion planning anticipated, because strategic situation had evolved, making Peleliu less critical than originally assessed. Strategic assessment that operation achieved its objective must be qualified by recognition that objective's value was questionable. Peleliu's airfield supported approximately 50 combat sorties during period November 1944, March 1945. Before Philippines bases became available, rendering Peleliu redundant, and these 50 sorties represented minimal return on investment of nearly 10,000 American casualties, particularly when compared to alternative strategy of bypassing Peleliu as Halsey recommended, which would have achieved Philippines campaign objectives without Peleliu casualties while isolating Japanese garrison that could have been neutralized through air interdiction, preventing reinforcement or resupply without requiring ground assault. According to memorandum from 3 Amphibious Corps Commander Major General Roy Geiger dated December 15, 1944. What superiors said after Peleliu operation reflected institutional discomfort with casualties that exceeded projections for objective whose strategic value diminished during operations execution.
Geiger, who'd assumed command from Lieutenant General Julian Smith mid-operation after Smith was reassigned, wrote that Peleliu operation demonstrates necessity for accurate pre-invasion intelligence regarding enemy fortifications and for realistic assessment of time and casualties required to
reduce heavily fortified positions, and this measured language obscured more pointed internal criticism where staff officers privately questioned whether operation should have been cancelled after Halsey's recommendation and whether continuing operations beyond capturing airfield was justified given diminishing returns on casualties invested, though official reports emphasized tactical proficiency while avoiding strategic second-guessing that might be interpreted as criticizing decisions that senior commanders including Admiral Nimitz had authorized. Orders to train others in specialized demolitions tactics were issued December 20 when Division published training circular titled Assault of Fortified Cave Positions that codified procedures Bausell and other demolitions specialists had developed, specifying flamethrower satchel charge coordination, approach techniques, supporting arms integration, and safety protocols, and requiring all Marine divisions training for Pacific operations to incorporate cave assault procedures into standard infantry training curriculum, and between December 1944 and February 1945, approximately 12,000 Marines across 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions received training in these procedures before Iwo Jima operation, where similar Japanese cave defenses required identical tactics. How many adopted approach quantified dissemination of tactical innovation, beyond Marines who received formal training in Bausell's procedures, approximately 30 Army infantry battalions that relieved Marines at Peleliu in November-December 1944. Learned demolitions techniques through on-site training where Marine demolitions specialists demonstrated procedures before transferring responsibility, and these Army units applied techniques during final reduction of bypassed Japanese positions in Umurbrugul's northern end where approximately 500 Japanese defenders held out until final organized resistance ended April 1945. 5 months after Marine departure, requiring sustained demolitions operations using procedures that Marines had pioneered. Protagonist Bausell's next assignment after recovering from shoulder wound involved transfer to Marine Training Command, where he served as Chief Demolitions Instructor at Camp Pendleton, California, teaching cave assault procedures to replacement drafts preparing for deployment to Pacific, and between January and August 1945. Bausell personally trained approximately 800 Marines in specialized tactics, including personnel who participated in Iwo Jima and Okinawa operations, though his combat service was concluded because medical board determined that permanent nerve damage from shoulder wound precluded further combat assignments requiring physical exertion that his injury prevented. Recognition that Bausell received included Navy Cross, Marine Corps' second highest decoration, awarded February 1945. For actions October 14 when he was wounded during assault without flamethrower support, and citation noted that, despite overwhelming enemy fire and inadequate supporting weapons, Gunnery Sergeant Bausell led demolitions assault against heavily fortified enemy position, demonstrating exceptional courage and tactical skill that enabled his unit to continue operations under adverse conditions, though citation's language reflected standard heroic narrative rather than acknowledging that tactical situation requiring assault without adequate support resulted from supply failure and strategic commitment to operation whose necessity was questionable. Institutional learning from Peleliu experience showed mixed results. Marine Corps incorporated cave assault tactics into doctrine, publishing Fleet Marine Force Manual 6-22 Cave and Tunnel Warfare in July 1945. That codified lessons from Peleliu and later operations. But strategic lessons regarding operation planning were less clearly absorbed because Iwo Jima operation February-March 1945 repeated Peleliu's pattern of extended high-casualty fighting for island whose strategic value was debated, suggesting that institutional tendency toward operational commitments regardless of strategic cost-benefit analysis remained unchanged despite Peleliu's cautionary example. Medical assessment of Bausell's permanent disability included approximately 60% loss of left shoulder mobility from nerve damage, chronic pain requiring ongoing medication, and psychological symptoms that military medicine classified as combat fatigue. But that modern diagnosis would recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, and Veterans Administration Disability Rating Board assessed him at 70% service-connected disability, providing pension and medical benefits though inadequate compensation for permanent injuries sustained in operation whose strategic necessity remained controversial. Recovery period for 1st Marine Division after Peleliu required 5 months before division was combat ready for Okinawa Operation April 1945. With reconstitution involving integration of approximately 8,000 replacement personnel to restore division to authorized strength, extended training period allowing new personnel to integrate with veteran cadre, and equipment overhaul replacing weapons and vehicles worn out during sustained Peleliu operations, and division's extended recovery timeline reflected cumulative effects of 73 days continuous combat that had depleted both personnel and material beyond any previous Marine operation. According to Marine Corps historical analysis published in The Assault of Peleliu, 1950, cave assault tactics that Bausell and other demolitions specialists developed spread through Pacific Theater affecting subsequent operations at multiple scales, Iwo Jima February-March 1945. Where approximately 7,500 Americans died and 19,000 were wounded during 36 days, fighting required similar demolitions procedures against cave systems that Japanese defenders had constructed in Mount Suribachi and Island's northern plateau, and Marines arriving at Iwo Jima with training in Peleliu tactics achieved cave reductions more efficiently than would have been possible without this preparation, though casualties still exceeded projections because Japanese defenses at Iwo were more extensive than even Peleliu's formidable fortifications. Total lives saved through improved demolitions tactics is impossible to calculate precisely. But comparative analysis suggests significant impact if Iwo Jima operations had used pre-Peleliu tactics requiring average 1.7 casualties per fortified position neutralized instead of post-Peleliu tactics requiring average 0.25 casualties per position, and given that Iwo Jima involved reduction of approximately 800 cave positions, casualty differential might have been approximately 1,100 additional casualties, suggesting that tactical innovations saved approximately 1,000 lives at Iwo Jima alone, and similar calculations for Okinawa were approximately 8,300 Americans died during 82 days April-June 1945. Suggest comparable casualty reduction from improved tactics. Battles where specialized demolitions were employed included every major Pacific Island operation after Peleliu. 3rd Marine Division at Iwo Jima used flamethrower satchel charge procedures as standard practice. 6th Marine Division at Okinawa employed identical tactics against cave positions in Southern Island's Shuri line defenses, and Army divisions at Okinawa including 96th and 7th Infantry Divisions adopted marine demolitions procedures after observing their effectiveness during combined operations, demonstrating that tactical innovation developed by individual units spread across entire Pacific Theater through formal training and informal knowledge transfer. Modern military applications of cave assault tactics developed at Peleliu include United States Marine Corps' close quarters battle training, where demolitions procedures remain fundamentally similar to 1944 techniques with improvements in explosive technology and personal protective equipment, but retaining basic concept of coordinated flamethrower demolitions employment. and Army Special Operations Forces training in tunnel and cave clearance operations uses principles derived from Pacific War experience, including reconnaissance suppression demolition sequence that Bausell pioneered, and international military forces that have faced cave-based insurgencies, including Soviet forces in Afghanistan 1980s and American forces in Afghanistan.
2001-2021 have adapted similar techniques, demonstrating that tactical problems Peleliu presented remain relevant in contemporary conflict. Protagonist Bausell's fate after war illustrated transition challenges that combat veterans experienced. He was discharged November 1945. After Japan's surrender with disability benefits and returned to Cumberland, Maryland, where he attempted to resume civilian construction work, but found that shoulder disability prevented physical labor his pre-war employment required, eventually finding work as construction supervisor where planning expertise was valuable. But physical limitations weren't disqualifying. Married. 1947. Had 3 children, and lived relatively quiet post-war life until death from heart disease. 1973. Age 60, and his Navy Cross and Citation were donated to Marine Corps Museum by his family, where they're displayed alongside Peleliu exhibit documenting operations, tactical innovations, and strategic controversies. Primary sources documenting Peleliu operations and Bausell's role include 1st Marine Division Action Report dated December 1944. Held at Marine Corps History Division Archives in Quantico, Virginia, containing detailed account of operations including demolitions, tactics, and casualty statistics. 2nd Battalion 5th Marines War Diary, held at National Archives, containing daily entries documenting specific engagements. Bausell's service record, including medical reports and award citations, held at National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri, and oral history interviews with Peleliu veterans conducted 1980s to 1990s by Marine Corps Historical Center, containing first-person accounts of cave fighting and tactical adaptations. Strategic debate regarding Peleliu's necessity continues among military historians, with consensus emerging that operation represented strategic error. Admiral Halsey's September 1944 recommendation to cancel invasion was militarily sound because Philippines campaign succeeded without requiring Peleliu support. General MacArthur's November 1944 assessment that Peleliu operations contributed minimal value to his campaign validated Halsey's earlier position, and post-war strategic analyses including Samuel Eliot Morrison's Official Navy History concluded that Peleliu might well have been bypassed without affecting Pacific War's outcome, meaning that approximately 10,000 American and 11,000 Japanese casualties were suffered for objective whose military value didn't justify human cost, demonstrating that strategic planning failures at theater level cannot be compensated by tactical proficiency at unit level, and that soldiers' courage and innovation cannot redeem operations that shouldn't have been conducted. Lessons from Peleliu relevant to modern military operations include necessity for accurate intelligence regarding enemy fortifications before committing forces to assault operations, requirement for specialized equipment and tactics when confronting unconventional defensive systems rather than assuming standard approaches will succeed, importance of allowing tactical commanders flexibility to adapt procedures based on combat experience rather than rigidly enforcing doctrinal approaches that battlefield conditions prove inadequate, an overarching principle that strategic objectives must justify anticipated casualties because tactical success cannot compensate for strategic irrelevance, and this final lesson from Peleliu, where nearly 10,000 casualties were suffered for island whose capture proved strategically unnecessary, remains relevant cautionary example for contemporary operational planning where commitment to initiated operations can override rational assessment of whether continuing engagement serves broader strategic purposes.